The day I moved in with Uncle John and Aunt Maria, my life took a sharp turn. Their house was nothing like the warm, loving home I'd lost. It was colder, stricter, a place where laughter seemed to echo with a hint of bitterness. Ellie, their daughter, met me with a stare that could freeze boiling water. "Great, now we've got a charity case living with us," Ellie muttered under her breath as I lugged my suitcase into what would be my new room. Aunt Maria shot her a look. "Ellie, that's enough. She's family, and we're doing the right thing." Uncle John, a man of few words, simply nodded. "You'll follow our rules here, Ruth. We expect you to contribute like everyone else." I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. I was just 11, trying to find my footing in a world that had suddenly turned upside down after my parents died in a car accident. The first few days were a blur of new rules and chores. Ellie made sure to remind me of my place at every turn. "Why are you even here? You're not really one of us," she sneered one day as we washed dishes. "Just a little orphan girl living off our charity." I clenched my jaw, focusing on the soapy water. "I'm here because your parents took me in," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah, and don't you forget it. You owe us," Ellie snapped back, splashing water in my direction. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed, listening to the silence of the house, missing my parents more than ever. Tears were my only solace, but I never let Ellie or her parents hear me cry. I made a silent vow to myself, I would endure, no matter what. Helping with the housework became my escape. Aunt Maria was particular about how things were done, and I learned quickly to avoid her criticism. "You call this clean?" she'd often scold, pointing at a spot I'd missed on the floor. "Sorry, Aunt Maria. I'll do it again," I'd say, grabbing the mop and going over the spot until she was satisfied. Uncle John was a stern man, his words sparing but sharp. "We're not running a hotel here, Ruth. Pull your weight," he'd remind me, even though I was already doing more chores than Ellie. Ellie, for her part, never missed a chance to make my life harder. She'd hide my sewing supplies, knowing how much I loved to sew, then feign innocence when I couldn't find them. "Looking for these?" she'd taunt, holding my scissors just out of reach. "Maybe if you're nice to me, I'll give them back." But I never retaliated. I kept to myself, burying my hurt and focusing on my sewing. It was my one joy, the thread that connected me to happier times with my parents. I started with doll clothes, moving on to alter whatever old clothes I could find. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Life with Uncle John and Aunt Maria was a mixed bag. They provided a roof over my head, sure, but it was Ellie who made sure I never forgot I was different. Amid the coldness and the chores, I found my escape in a corner of my room with a needle, thread, and old fabrics that whispered promises of transformation. One evening, as I was turning a faded curtain into a skirt, Ellie barged into my room without knocking. "What are you doing with that old rag?" she sneered, her eyes scanning my makeshift sewing station. "Just making something new," I replied, keeping my focus on the fabric under my hands. I wasn't about to let her see how much her words stung. Ellie laughed, a harsh sound that filled the small space. "You think you're some kind of designer? Please. You'll always be wearing hand-me-downs and trash." I bit back a retort, choosing silence over fueling the fire. She shook her head, smirking, and left, leaving a trail of scorn in her wake. The next day at school, I wore the skirt. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I paired it with a simple top I'd altered, feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. That's when Kelly, a girl from my class, noticed. "Hey, Ruth, that's a cool skirt. Did you get that downtown?" she asked, eyeing the pattern with genuine interest. I hesitated, then decided on the truth. "No, I made it myself." "Seriously? That's awesome. You've got talent," Kelly said, her words a balm to the sting of Ellie's mockery. Encouraged by Kelly's reaction, I started spending every spare moment sewing. My room became a sanctuary filled with fabric scraps and dreams stitched into reality. Each piece I created was a step away from the identity Ellie and her parents imposed on me. One Saturday, as I was cutting into a dress that Aunt Maria had declared too old, Uncle John walked in. "What's all this?" he grumbled, surveying the mess of fabrics and patterns scattered around. "I'm making something new to wear," I said, trying to keep my voice steady under his scrutiny. He picked up a piece of fabric, twisting it in his hands. "Seems like a waste of time. You should focus on your chores, not play dress up." His words were like a slap, dismissing not just my passion, but my efforts to rise above my circumstances. "It's not a waste," I muttered, but he was already walking away, uninterested in my defense. Despite their disdain, I couldn't stop. Sewing became more than a hobby, it was my rebellion, my claim to an identity they couldn't touch. Each stitch was a word in the narrative I was writing for myself, one where I wasn't just the orphaned niece, but Ruth, the girl who could create beauty from neglect. Things took a sharp turn after I hit 18. Ellie got herself a shiny new car for her birthday, a sleek thing that made my heart sink every time it roared to life. Meanwhile, Uncle John and Aunt Maria suddenly upgraded their lives with fancy gadgets and furniture that seemed out of place in our modest home. It was clear they were living it up, while I was left figuring out how to stretch every penny. One day, as I was mulling over the idea of getting a job post-high school, Aunt Maria dropped a bombshell. "Your parents left you some money for college," she said nonchalantly, as if mentioning the weather. I was stunned. "Really? I had no idea." "Yeah, but there's a catch," Uncle John chimed in, his tone sharp. "You're staying local for college. It's safer, and we can keep an eye on you." My dream of leaving for a big city to study fashion design crumbled. But "No buts." Aunt Maria cut me off. "We've decided. You can thank us later." I swallowed my protests. Arguing was pointless. So, I enrolled in the local college, my dreams of fashion design barely hanging by a thread. Needing to support myself and save for the future, I landed a job as an assistant secretary at a law office nearby. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. "Look at you, all grown up and working," Ellie sneered one evening as I was sketching designs. "Still playing dress up, I see." "Better than playing spoiled brat," I retorted without looking up. My patience with her was wearing thin. She huffed, clearly annoyed, and stormed out. I couldn't help but smile a little. For once, I had the last word. Despite the setbacks, I didn't give up on fashion. Every evening, after work and classes, I'd dive into my world of sketches and fabrics, transforming Ellie's discarded clothes into pieces that felt like me. It was my rebellion, my way of holding on to the dream, even if it was stitched together from the leftovers of someone else's life. Working late again, Ruth, my coworker, Mike, asked one evening as he passed by my desk. "Yeah, got a project I'm passionate about," I replied, packing up my sketches discreetly. "Must be nice, having something you love doing," he said, a hint of envy in his voice. "It is," I admitted, feeling a surge of pride. "It's not much, but it's mine." Walking home that night, I felt a mix of emotions. Frustration, for sure, at the way my life was hemmed in by my guardian's decisions. But also determination. I might have been forced to stay local, but I wasn't going to let that define me or my future. The more time passed, the more I started to feel like I was living in a house of cards, about to crumble at any moment. Uncle John and Aunt Maria, who once lived as modestly as monks, were suddenly splurging like lottery winners. First, it was Aunt Maria flaunting a fur coat so pricey, it could have fed us for months. Then, Uncle John brought home a TV so big, you'd think we were running a cinema out of our living room. And Ellie, who never lifted a finger for work or study, was now flashing gadgets I'd only seen in glossy magazine ads. It didn't add up. I wasn't a genius at math, but even I knew our household budget couldn't magically stretch to cover luxury splurges. They were being dodgy about where all this cash was coming from, and it set my nerves on edge. One evening at dinner, with the new TV blaring some reality show in the background, I decided to poke the bear. "So, where's all this new stuff coming from?" "Last I checked, we weren't hitting the jackpot every week," I said, trying to keep my voice light, but my words came out sharper than I intended. Aunt Maria shot me a look, her eyes narrowing. "That's none of your business, young lady," she snapped, her tone icy. Uncle John, caught off guard, almost choked on his food. Coughing, he managed to say, "Well, I got a promotion at work." "Yeah, that's it. A big one." "Promotion, huh?" I pressed, not buying it for a second. Must have been one heck of a jump to start throwing money around like this. Ellie, sensing tension, quickly chimed in with her usual snark. "What's it to you, Ruth? Jealous much? Not all of us need to scrape by, you know." I clenched my fists under the table, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "Just curious is all." Seems weird, doesn't it? Suddenly, living like kings out of nowhere. The room went silent, the only sound coming from the TV's chatter. Uncle John and Aunt Maria exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Uncle John cleared his throat. "Let's just say we've been careful with our savings, all right? No need to worry your little head about it." "Careful with savings?" "Right." I knew something was off. The dots weren't connecting, and their answers were as flimsy as a house of cards in a windstorm. That night, as I lay in bed, the pieces of the puzzle nagged at me. The fur coat, the TV, Ellie's gadgets, and the documents. Those endless documents they had me sign, always with the excuse that it was for benefits or some other vague reason. I trusted them, never bothering to read what I was signing. But lying there, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Could those signatures of mine be the source of their sudden wealth? The deception swirling around my guardian's sudden wealth weighed heavily on me, but amidst the chaos, a sliver of light shone through. Tom. He worked part-time at the law office, a law student with a sharp mind and a kind heart. Our connection was immediate, a bond formed over shared dreams and the mundane realities of office life. One afternoon, while organizing files, our hands brushed, sending a jolt of electricity through me. We locked eyes, and he smiled. "Ruth, you ever think about escaping this place?" he asked, his voice low. "All the time," I admitted, feeling a flush of warmth. "But it feels like I'm stuck in quicksand." He nodded, understanding. "Well, if you ever need a partner in crime, you know where to find me." It was a joke, but it sparked something between us, a flicker of rebellion against the constraints of our lives. Our secret rendezvous became the highlight of my days, stolen moments filled with laughter and dreams. But as our connection deepened, Aunt Maria grew suspicious. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen. "I've seen you sneaking around with that boy from the office." "Don't think I haven't noticed," she hissed, her eyes boring into mine. I tried to keep my composure. "Tom's just a friend, Aunt Maria. Nothing to worry about." "A friend, huh? Don't play me for a fool, Ruth. You're not to see him again." "It's for your own good," she snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. I was stunned. "You can't control who I see or what I feel. Tom's a good person." Aunt Maria's face hardened. "I won't have you ruining your future for some boy. You'll thank me one day." I bit my tongue, anger and frustration boiling inside. It was clear she wouldn't listen. From that moment, Tom and I knew we had to meet in secret, our love a forbidden flame that refused to be extinguished. "Looks like we're modern-day Romeo and Juliet," Tom joked one night as we huddled in the shadows of a park, far from prying eyes. "I guess that makes Aunt Maria the villain in our story," I replied, trying to smile, despite the bitterness in my heart. "We'll find a way out of this, Ruth. Together," Tom said, taking my hand. His determination was comforting, a beacon of hope in the darkness. But our secret meetings couldn't go unnoticed forever. Ellie, ever the spy, caught us one day and wasted no time in running back to Aunt Maria and Uncle John. The confrontation that followed was explosive. "You're grounded. No more job, no more college until you learn your place," Uncle John declared, his face red with anger. "You can't do this. You're not my jailers." I shot back, defiance rising in me. Aunt Maria's laugh was cold and sharp. "Oh, but we can, dear. You'll learn to obey, or you'll lose everything." The threat was real, and the stakes were higher than ever. In the dead of night, Tom and I made plans to fight back, to reclaim my inheritance and our freedom. "It's us against the world, Ruth. We'll expose their lies and build our own future," Tom whispered, his words a vow I clung to. It was a chilly Thursday evening, the kind where the wind seemed to whisper secrets as it passed. Tom and I were huddled in the dim light of his tiny apartment, the only place we felt safe from Aunt Maria and Uncle John's prying eyes. The documents I had secretly photographed lay spread out on the coffee table between us, a silent testament to the betrayal I was about to uncover. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Ruth?" Tom asked, his voice laced with concern. He knew the weight of what we might discover. I nodded, my heart hammering in my chest. "I need to know, no matter how bad it is." We started with the will of my parents, a document I had never seen before. As Tom read it aloud, the reality of their love for me, their hopes for my future, hit me hard. They had left me not just their savings, but also investments and properties, a legacy meant to secure my life. And there, in clear legal language, was the clause about my inheritance coming into full effect at 18. "So, they've been lying to you, Ruth. All this time," Tom said, his voice tight with anger. "But why? How could they just use me like this?" The betrayal stung, a bitter pill to swallow. We dug deeper, examining the documents I had signed. Tom's legal knowledge helped unravel the complex web of deceit. "Look here," he pointed out. "By signing this, you basically allowed them access to your funds. They've been funneling your inheritance into their accounts." The realization hit me like a freight train. My trust, my loyalty, had been manipulated to fund their lavish lifestyle. "I can't believe this. They told me it was all for benefits, for my college fund," I said, feeling naive and foolish. "It's classic fraud, Ruth. And it's illegal." "You have rights," Tom reassured me, his hand finding mine. The next steps were daunting. We discussed lawyers, legal battles, and the possibility of going public. The thought of facing Aunt Maria and Uncle John, exposing them for the frauds they were, made my stomach churn. "We'll need evidence, solid proof that can't be dismissed," Tom said, already plotting our course of action. I was scared, more scared than I'd ever been, but the fire of justice burned within me. "Let's do it. Let's expose them. I can't let them get away with this." The determination in my voice surprised even me. I was no longer the timid girl who had arrived at their doorstep, seeking refuge. I was a woman wronged, ready to claim what was rightfully mine. The plan was set. We would gather more evidence, consult with a lawyer Tom knew, and build a case that would stand up in court. It was going to be a long, hard fight, but I was ready. Ready to face the guardians who had become my oppressors, ready to reclaim my life and my future. The days leading up to the court date were a blur. Tom and I spent every moment poring over documents, meeting with our lawyer, Mr. Henderson, and preparing our case. The evidence was solid, but the thought of facing Aunt Maria and Uncle John in court made my stomach twist in knots. "Remember, it's about the truth," Mr. Henderson reminded me as we sat in his cluttered office, papers strewn about. "Stick to the facts, and we'll get through this." The day of reckoning arrived faster than I had hoped. The courtroom was cold, sterile, and filled with the murmurs of onlookers. Uncle John and Aunt Maria sat across from us, their faces stoic, betraying no sign of guilt. "Ms. Thompson, can you confirm that you were unaware of the contents of the documents you were signing at the request of the defendants?" the judge asked, his gaze fixed on me. "Yes, Your Honor. I trusted them. I thought they were looking out for me," I replied, my voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. Aunt Maria's lawyer was slick, trying to paint me as an ungrateful niece, biting the hand that fed her. "Isn't it true that the defendants provided you with a home and care after your parents' tragic demise?" he asked, his tone dripping with insinuation. They did, but that doesn't give them the right to steal my inheritance. I shot back, refusing to be intimidated. The turning point came when Tom took the stand, presenting the financial records we had uncovered. These documents clearly show the transfer of funds from Ms. Thompson's accounts to the defendants, immediately following her signature on the documents they presented to her. He explained, his confidence undercutting the defense's arguments. Aunt Maria and Uncle John squirmed in their seats, their facade finally cracking under the weight of evidence against them. After what felt like an eternity, the judge delivered his verdict. The evidence presented clearly demonstrates a breach of trust and fraudulent activity by the defendants. I hereby order the immediate restitution of all misappropriated funds to Ms. Thompson, along with appropriate penalties for the defendants. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. Justice had been served. Outside, the sun seemed brighter, the air fresher. "You did it, Ruth. You stood up for yourself," Tom said, wrapping me in a hug. "I couldn't have done it without you," I whispered, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. With my inheritance rightfully returned, I set my sights on the future. With my inheritance rightfully returned, I set my sights on the future. I started studying to be a designer, fulfilling my long-held dream. It was difficult, but interesting. And it's fair to myself. Years had flown by, turning pages filled with trials into chapters of triumph. My atelier, once just a dream woven from threads of hope and defiance, now stood as a testament to my journey. I had built a name for myself in the city, not just as a fashion designer, but as a symbol of resilience. One afternoon, as the autumn sun cast long shadows across my studio, Ellie barged in, her presence as unwelcome as a storm cloud. Time hadn't been kind to her, the arrogance still hung around her like a tattered cloak, but desperation had etched lines into her face. "Ruth, you gotta help me," she started without a greeting, her voice a mix of demand and despair. "I'm in deep, really deep. I need money." I paused, the shock of her audacity giving way to a cold sense of inevitability. "Ellie, I can't just hand you money. But I can offer you a job. Work for it, earn it." Her reaction was immediate and volcanic. "A job? Are you kidding me? I don't need a job, Ruth, I need cash, and I need it now," she spat, her eyes blazing with anger. I stood my ground, feeling the weight of our shared past heavy between us. "I won't fuel your mistakes, Ellie. A job is all I'm offering. Take it or leave it." Her fury boiled over. "You think you're better than me now, huh? Just because you play dress up for a living?" she sneered, her words laced with venom. "No, Ellie. I worked hard for everything I have. I'm offering you a chance to do the same," I replied, my voice steady. Ellie's laugh was bitter, devoid of humor. "I don't need your charity or your lectures. You'll regret this, Ruth." As she stormed out, I felt a wave of sadness for what we both had lost, but also a deep, unshakable conviction in my choices. I had learned the hard way that no one could save you if you weren't willing to save yourself. Weeks later, news trickled down to me that Aunt Maria and Uncle John's house had been sold off to cover debts. Ellie had vanished, chasing after windfalls that would never come. The cycle of choices and consequences had come full circle. Sitting in my studio, surrounded by the vibrant chaos of creativity, I reflected on the journey. From the ashes of a broken past, I had carved out a space where dreams took shape, where resilience was the fabric of success. Tom, now my husband and partner in every sense, placed a supportive hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" I smiled, leaning into his strength. "Yeah, I am. It's just, life's funny, isn't it? How it all turns out." He squeezed my shoulder gently. "It's not just life, Ruth. It's you. You made this happen. You turned the odds into your masterpiece." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the city, I realized he was right. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a whole new book, one where the pages were filled with the colors of hard-won joy and the quiet strength of redemption,